Hi, I'm Brandon. I'm an alcoholic and addict in recovery. And today I want to talk a little bit about taking care of yourself in recovery. I'm going to read some important parts from the book Living Sober, put out by Alcoholics Anonymous World Services, and talk about the difference between being selfish and taking care of yourself. Sometimes we blur those lines as recovering addicts. It's important that we get that straight and give ourselves permission to take care of ourselves so that we can recover. So let's read a little bit from the book. I'm going to talk first about the illness of addiction. And they say convalescence from the illness of active alcoholism and addiction takes some time, and anyone going through it deserves consideration and a measure of TLC. In times past, people often believe that those recovering from certain ailments just deserve to suffer, since it was thought that they had deliberately, selfishly inflicted the sickness on themselves. And they go on to say, we have learned that one of the persons least likely to treat the alcoholic like a sick person is, somewhat surprisingly, the alcoholic herself or himself. Once again, our old thinking habits are cropping up. So we've got to be really careful that we be realistic about what's going on as people in recovery. We're recovering from a disease, and I think for me especially, as I've gone through recovery, I tend to forget that, and I tend to go back to my old thinking of, you brought this on yourself. It's your fault that you're in this situation. You need to fix it by repenting and by suffering because of what you've done in the past. And that's our old way of thinking. We've got to get away from that. We've got to treat this as the disease that it is, and treat recovery as recovery from a disease. Once we do that, it's easier to keep things straight in our own heads about the difference between taking care of ourselves and being selfish about our time and what we're doing. They go on to say something that's really been important for me to keep in mind. It is often said that problem drinkers and addicts are perfectionists, impatient about any shortcomings, especially our own. Setting impossible goals for ourselves, we nevertheless struggle fiercely to reach these unattainable ideals. Then, since no human being could possibly maintain the extremely high standards we often demand, we find ourselves falling short, as all people must whose aims are unrealistic. And discouragement and depression set in. We angrily punish ourselves for being less than super perfect. That is precisely where we can start being good, at least fair to ourselves. We would not demand of a child or of any handicapped person more than is reasonable. It seems to us that we have no right to expect such miracles of ourselves as recovering alcoholics either. So when you set a goal for yourself and you're getting upset with yourself for not meeting that goal, or you have an expectation of yourself and you get upset that you haven't met that expectation, turn around, think about someone in the exact same situation as you, and ask yourself, how would you treat that person if they felt the same way as you for not meeting that expectation? If they had that same expectation of themselves? You know, a lot of times I'll find that the expectations I have of myself are very different than the expectations I have of other people. That's not necessarily a great way to live. We've got to be fair in our expectations of ourselves, and we've got to not set ourselves up for failure by having expectations that are unattainable. Perfection is an expectation that's unattainable. And so we that's why the phrase progress, not perfection, is so important to people in recovery. It is acceptable, it is attainable to progress, to move forward. That's something that's attainable. To achieve perfection is not. So we got to focus on what is reasonable for us to work towards in life and get away from the perfection that has often driven our behaviors in the past and then driven our subsequent depression and anxiety and all sorts of other issues that we've encountered in our lives. So again, they say it well here. What would we do if a sick loved one or friend got discouraged about slow recuperation progress and began to refuse medicine? So, if you had a friend who was suffering from an illness, they're recuperating, and they expected to be fully well by Monday, and then Tuesday rolls around and they're still a little sick, and they get upset about that, what would you say to them? You would say, well, that's just the way the disease works. You just got to keep taking care of yourself and it will get better. You have to say the same things to yourselves. You can't expect perfection on Monday for a disease that is 20 years in the making. I drank and drugged for almost 20 years of my life, and I'm only a year and almost 5 months into recovery. I can't expect to have just completely undone those 2 decades of work by this time in my recovery. I just have to keep looking at my daily progress. Um, Moving on, because there's some good stuff I want to get to here. When feelings of discouragement come, we then need to encourage ourselves. More than one of us have found it good medicine to give ourselves a pat on the back, to salute the progress already made, without being smug or dangerously egotistical about it, of course. So if you are hesitant to celebrate your achievements because you're worried that you might be pumping up your ego or getting a little prideful, then celebrate your achievements with gratitude. Be thankful. Look at what you've achieved and then be grateful to either God or your family or your friends or yourself. It's okay to be grateful to yourself for doing what was needed to get to that place, to make that achievement. So sometimes when you need to celebrate some achievements, gratitude is a good way to do so without letting ego and pride step in the door. Moving on a little further down the page, maybe we have fallen short somehow, backslid in our thinking or actions despite knowing better. So what? We're not perfect creatures. We should settle for small progress rather than bemoan any lack of perfection. So don't beat yourself up if you can't if you don't do everything exactly the way that it should be done. Don't beat yourself up. Don't expect perfection. Look for progress and work toward that. That's what you should be doing. It doesn't mean you make excuses. It doesn't mean that you consciously allow yourself to do things you know you shouldn't be doing. But when you do something other than what you feel like is appropriate, and in hindsight you can see that, then just learn from it and move on. Don't beat yourself up. And moving on, but there is more perhaps. Have we been enjoying life lately, or have we been so concerned about getting better, kept our nose so earnestly near the grindstone of self improvement, that we have failed to enjoy a sunset, a new moon, a good meal, a needed holiday from care, a good joke, some affection? We've known so many people who have burned out on recovery because they weren't taking the time that they needed to recover themselves. They weren't taking the time they needed to just enjoy life and do the things that are fun. We don't get into recovery to do recovery 24/7, even though it's a 24/7 gig. We also do it so that we can take time to enjoy the things in life. One of the things that I love doing now is sitting and watching movies. It was hard for me to do that when I was in my addiction. It was hard for me to pay attention for that long of a period of time. Now I can do it, and it's great. That kind of stuff is okay to do. You should give yourself permission for those things. because they go on to say, we have found we can enjoy sober every good thing we enjoyed while drinking and many, many more. It takes a little practice, but the rewards more than make up for the effort. To do so is not selfish, but self-protective. And I think that's the key for me, is that as recovering addicts, we tend to identify anything we do just for ourselves as selfish. That's not what selfish is. You know, selfish is ignoring the interests of others in order to elevate your self interest. So, doing things without thinking about their impact on other people, that's selfishness. Doing something because you enjoy it, or because it helps you feel more well rounded, or because it lifts you up spiritually, or just makes you happy, that's not selfish. As long as you're not hurting someone else by doing that. So think about that. Think about, when was the last time you did something just for yourself and just because it's something you enjoyed doing. As long as it's not hurting someone else, make sure to take time for those things, because one of the biggest joys I've found in recovery is that I have time for those things, and that I can enjoy them in a way that I haven't in years. And that adds beauty and depth to recovery, that make it a life worth living for me every day for the rest of my life. Hope you all have a good day. I'll see you back here with more tomorrow.